20 minutes of the best top expert tips and hacks to make your life better. LifeHakX. Technology, business, multimedia, wellness and health, events, reviews, and more. This is Mary Collins from RadioX Switzerland and LifeHakX Media, and I have the pleasure to have Michelle Guiliano on with us today. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, Mary. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure, and you have such important subjects to talk with us about today. But before that, I'm going to give everyone a little introduction about you. So, Michelle Guiliano is an award-winning entrepreneur, a strategic consultant, a TEDx speaker, and life coach. She is the co-founder of SALT Consulting and the communications and co-creator of the Integrity System, your online self-coaching program for improved decision-making and personal accountability. Along with her business partner, Denise Nickerson, they have created Swiss Olympic approved recertification programs and coached over 100 Olympic professional and youth sports coaches in empathy, active listening, mindfulness, and human development, and communications. And together, they have also created and co-founded Women Rock Switzerland, which helps to elevate women's headed projects, and to support the economic independence of women in Switzerland. So, what an amazing amount of stuff that you've already done and are currently doing, Michelle. Tell us a little bit more about how you ended up in Switzerland.
Well, thank you so much for that warm introduction. I really appreciate it, Mary. So I arrived in Switzerland in 2001, and I came after having a coaching career actually in collegiate sports in New York City. I was a coach for women's rowing at an Ivy League school. And right before moving here, I crossed the country to Seattle, Washington, where I developed a new career in executive search and became a top-ranked executive search consultant working with business professionals in the tech sector. Oh. So I got married in Seattle, pretty young. I was only 24. And my husband then had this great opportunity to come to Europe through Microsoft. And we could choose certain cities. And one of the cities was Zurich. So we were also privileged enough to get to come out and try those cities for a week at Microsoft's expense. And so I got toured and wined and dined around Switzerland. I did the complete tour in the car, and I just fell in love with the city. And one of the things I'd really valued about life in Seattle was year-round skiing and year-round boating and the sort of active outdoor lifestyle. And so Switzerland was perfectly fitting for that reality. And I'd lived in several cities already. And one of the things that had been a good constant for me was the rowing community. It's usually a very professional and connected and tight-knit group of people who are really passionate about sport. Mm-hmm. So every city I'd ever lived in already at that point, I had always joined the rowing club. And it was my first culture shock to realize that in Zurich in 2001, there was no rowing club admitting women in any capacity at all. I had already produced Olympic champions for Canada and the United States in a coaching capacity, and I couldn't even barter or trade coaching services. I couldn't pay for the right to join a membership. I could not row a boat in Zurich. And when I got here, that was one of my first shocking culture trips. And it really does impact your ability to network and get ahead when you count on those kinds of clubs and informal networks to find your way.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to go into, which is what were the first struggles that you came across? Most women say that they can't find their favorite brand of peanut butter, not, not that you dealing with all of the stuff that they brought over that's electronically not going to work anymore, or that they have to get that's crazy. That is crazy to think that Switzerland would not even have so what happened from there?
Well, so let's put it in historical perspective. And I'm not a historian, but I'm here pre-Euro in terms of the currency, not the economic union. And I'm here pre-Schengen in 2001. So there's no agreement on the flexible movement of people at that time. Mm-hmm. So I would say, top 3 stories in terms of cultural adaptation required that you that I did not expect. I think that in today's world, life is so much easier. We can digitally connect and learn so much about a new city and even connect in digital communities and get resourced really fast. But at that time, these communities didn't exist. So I came to Switzerland, and a second culture shock was we had, my O in my last name was prohibiting us from landing an apartment because of there was some foreigner bias. So the last name, the Scandinavian last name of my then husband was preferred. So it became really apparent that I couldn't operate, number one, without a man, and number two, in my name, without experiencing some bias. Another example of sexism that there were two that are just pretty remarkable to this day. And now, it's 2001 is a while ago. So there are adults that, there are 18, 19, 20-year-olds who, when they hear this story, they can't fathom. But it's really true. So I went to one of the appliance shops because I was a Hausfrau. I was a home wife.
Housewife, yeah.
I hadn't yet found my job. Or my way. And so I needed to buy a new refrigerator that would fit inside of the gorgeous cabinetry of this pretty normal middle class apartment. And so I had taken the dimensions. I was ready to go buy the refrigerator. And I remember sitting, I chose the one I wanted. I found the dimensions that were required and I wanted to buy it. Seems pretty straightforward. The sales professional was not willing to sell me a refrigerator and continued to tell me that I must have gotten the dimensions wrong. He would not accept the return if I got the dimensions wrong. He was quite harassing to the point where I was thinking, okay, maybe you don't want the card, like maybe you want cash. Business. So I remember thinking, why wouldn't you take my cash? So I actually went down to the cash machine, came back with the 2,000 Swiss francs or whatever was required to buy this refrigerator in cash, and he would not take my cash. So I remember thinking, okay, so from a pretty capitalistic society like the United States, which also has, fairness and laws against discrimination to a certain measure, let's be honest. That was a second culture shock. And the third story I would tell you is I actually succeeded in getting some interviews. And at that time I had been wined and dined and interviewed very, very nicely with a top executive search consulting firm. And I was interviewing with one of the sons of the founders of this firm, who was very surprised by my success and wanted to hear case in point time again on how I had achieved what I had achieved at such a young age. I found out later he hadn't yet produced Swiss franc 1 in 2 years working for his father's company. So he was milking me for quite a bit of information. And at the end, I realized I wasn't going to get this job and I didn't really understand why. So I asked him, what is your advice for someone with my skills and my background? And he, after being enthusiastic, he completely turned and said, well, a married young woman like you, and he dissed my American education with an American education, who will in 2 years be saddled with a couple of kids. Frankly, you'll be no use to anyone professionally. I don't know.
No.
And so that's a quote, I'll be no use to anyone professionally and saddled with a couple of kids in 2 years. So I remember thinking, wow, asking about someone's marital status is even illegal in 2001 in the United States in any HR
Not
environment
in Europe.
context.
I've had that one in Ireland. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
So those were some of the
surprised because like there's an Italian part of Switzerland, there's a French part of Switzerland, but I do know what you're talking about where to go and open up a bank account or anything you needed your husband's to get at least a car. I do remember in Lugano that it was like, no, you have to come with your husband if you want to lease a car. And it was like, wait, what?
Phone contracts, any sort of running basis, yeah.
So that is crazy, and I hope things have changed.
Well, of course, and I've stayed here, and I love the country, and I love the people. But I do think, every place I'd ever lived, I had this limited, sheltered existence. Even though I'd lived in many cities, they were all essentially in North America. And whether you're in the United States or Canada, there's a neighborly kind of feel and vibe, and there's a block party or a barbecue or something like this. And I remember that it took me 4, 5, 6, even 7 times inviting neighbors to my house before I ever got an invite in return. Like there was
Yeah.
a stranger danger kind of awareness or
Right.
something. So
Yeah.
it took a lot of work, but then you do get in. And once you're in, you can really be in for life and really develop incredible relationships. And obviously I choose it and I continue to choose it. So it is a country I really respect and admire and love.
Well, I am glad that you found your way in, and you're right. Every culture is different, and it is a definite culture shock from people coming from the U.S. who they don't they take for granted how open and how actually non-biased in many ways Americans are. At least even if it's in a shallow way, at least they try to accept you before they hate you or reject you. So,
I don't know that it is universally true, but I like
well,
the idea.
but did you find that having an English speaking community, expat community help, or because obviously with the rowing, you had to start that from scratch.
There was none that I could find. So at that time, I do think it could have helped, which is why I've said started one. But I do think it could have helped. There was a Thursday night drinks night where English speakers of different origins would get together, and there was a wonderful Australian woman who put that together. And so yeah, I did go hang out from time to time. But what I think really makes a community is shared passion, shared interest, a desire to lift one another up and help, and to really get to know and not just share a drink. And there are plenty of people in the world who would like to connect outside of a bar.
Yes,
and I'm
absolutely.
usually one of those people. And so I did really find it difficult. And though Switzerland is a country that has 4 recognized languages and a huge international population that fuels this largely service economy, it did not have those kind of connectors for English speakers or expats. And so I wasn't privileged to those kinds of things. But Switzerland did have resources that if you got curious and connected, you could go and take advantage of. And of course I did, and I was. And so I was able to fall back, as many people who follow a partner into a foreign country do, onto developing a business. That award-winning entrepreneur part was my first product-based business, where I wasn't a designer, but I designed some products and won an award up in Germany at the largest outdoor sports fair in the world at the time, not just in Europe. And so I found my way. I went to startup weekends. There is a lot of funding for startup and for entrepreneurs, not so much for women still, but there's an opportunity to test your skills, your talents, to pitch, to deliver, to meet your team, to test and try people as well before you team. And so there really were a lot of opportunities to take advantage of. And plus, I think at that time I had good perspective that change is always good, and that I was, regardless of what I was going to be able to, sort of sink my teeth into, I was going to develop and grow through curiosity, through introspection, through working with other people. I did get a job. I was able to place a board executive in a software company in the UK. Like my early years, they were hard. I had to dance and I had to play and I had to find my way. But it was possible. And in the end, you fall in love.
Well, this is it. And so would those be your, I at least 3 top hacks there, which is, first of all, explore and be curious, because, if it's not available, you may find something that is, or you may find a way to develop that. There are opportunities, especially now, that were not there back in the day. Try to adapt by just being curious and putting your best foot forward, and not taking it personally, but just, moving forward and trying to find what's possible. And those are great. That's great advice. But were there also things besides those things that were quite obviously unexpected? Was there anything more that put strain on your expat move at some point when you were while you were in Switzerland?
Well, sure. I mean, I had a unexpected and sudden, and what turned out to be a high conflict divorce in this foreign country, and that complicated things on ways you can't comprehend when you think that you've, in my case, I had met what I thought was the love of my life at only age 16. I married him when I was 24, and we'd been together through many moves and many countries, and so I just thought that Switzerland would be like anywhere else. And so, when you ultimately are surprised with new information and new insights, what was shocking for me was realizing just how completely out of position I had allowed myself to be. And
Right.
so, out of position meaning I did not have my own political status. I did not have my own access to health care without my marriage and his job. I did not have my own access to bank accounts in my own name. Those had been moved into bank accounts into his name alone after a surgery. There was some machinations involved as well. The house assets that we had were in joint names, but over the years they got sold and moved into single name ownership. And so there were all kinds of ways in which I had gotten out of position politically, financially, economically, in terms of the economic engine, the rights to work, the rights to live where you've been living for, in this case, 10 years. The right to raise your children, right? If you can't work, if you can't live and stay where they are habitually residential, where their habitual residence is a term from the Hague Convention that gives children some rights to where they've been living. But you've got to have your own rights independent of your marriage. And so it was a real eye-opener to realize just how, in helping him in America to get his green card status, I had turned my private bank accounts into joint bank accounts. And this had worked for years. And then joint bank accounts turned into, bank accounts in his name, which you think your marriage is going to protect you from or through. And depending on whose country's marital laws ultimately are applied. In our case, we were married in America. America law, that state law, that particular state law should apply. But you have, in this case, Scandinavian courts applying that law. Specifically Danish courts applying that law, and they don't, so your costs are enormous. You need legal help and support. You need emotional help and support on every level. And I would add one more thing, which is that in the beginning, it was very easy to say that, oh, wow, this sexism thing is real. This racism and xenophobia is real. And there's a real issue here in Switzerland. And it was very easy to point fingers and blame outside of my own home. The truth is that I didn't realize and was actively justifying my husband's behavior in terms of the ways in which he was a participant to my subjugation and a participant ultimately to abuse. And so I was the last, I would say, and maybe many victims of abuse are aware of this, but I think I was the last to know just how under the thumb I had allowed myself to be. And with that comes shaming and blaming and, shame, blame, and frame. And the shame that wells up inside of you when you do think of yourself as accomplished and talented and able and curious. You don't think that you're targeted for that reason, which you are, I've since learned, but you think that you're going to find your way out. You think that you're going to figure it out. You're going to find your way out. You're going to make your way. And so you don't think, I was denying for years the abuse that I was facing in my own home from my primary partner and how that was affecting every other relationship I had, including travel rights and access to my parents and my brothers, and my children to know their American family and the ability to weigh in on decisions in your family. All of this was layering in.
Why work harder when you can work smarter and live better? Life hacks.
So we're on with Michelle Guiliano, and she has been talking about her experience as an expat living in Switzerland from an earlier time period where women did not have the same amount of rights that women take for granted now, like having a bank account without having a partner come and, set up the bank account with you, buying a car, rent. There's so many different things that women just didn't have access to, including, Michelle, you were saying that there was no rowing team for women when you first got to Switzerland. And now we've gotten onto a very serious subject of divorce in a foreign country. And I think it's very important that we go ahead and, Life Hacks listeners, we're going to extend this and have a couple of episodes of this. All of them will be available on a blog. However, on radio, we're going to go ahead and put part 1, part 2, part 3. But with that, Michelle, you were just saying that you experienced quite a bit of shock and trauma because you had set your life up as being perfect, and, not even a case where, as an expat, first time, first country, break up, but having traveled many countries with your partner and finding still, this disturbance where it really messed with your life. So tell us a little bit more about that and what you wish you knew then that you know now, to help our listeners who may be going through something similar or may so in the future.
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity to help share stories. I really think that through stories, we can learn, we can grow. Usually they're highly memorable. I would like to be memorable, but really to help others notice the signs and symptoms of abuse, because of course, we want to prevent it whenever possible. We don't want to marry people with various personality traits or controlling behavior. We don't want to marry those people, and we don't want to have children with those people. But if you do, and if you realize that you wake up one day and you're like, wow, I'm smelling and looking around the world, and my world is not as normal as other people's worlds, or I've been really isolated and alone, and I'm feeling shame, or my confidence has been eroded, or I'm being gaslit. I know that he just said, if you find yourself, so some of the signs and symptoms of abuse are, again, isolation. I would say that's one key tactic of almost all abusers of every form. And I'm not qualified to diagnose anybody. I'm a coach. I am not a psychologist or a professional on that level. My view is that if you notice that you're isolated and experiencing shame, you think, your family and friends think you're in this jet-setting lifestyle, and you've gone to a foreign country and you're making it work, and otherwise, that is one of the first signs that you're probably not in an okay circumstance, and you need to go start talking to people. And those people are professionals who know something about abuse, like doctors and therapists, and also certain coaches. You need to get a team. And in an ideal world, one of the first things that you and everybody can do before abuse, right, as a preventative technique, is also really enjoyable to do. And that is keep your connections, keep your girlfriends, keep your siblings, keep your family, keep them close, because they know you better than anyone else. And you don't need to be a party girl with 30 people, but you do need to have 1, 2, 5 really trusted, great people who you tell the truth to. And that owning up and that truth, and then not letting the shame affect you, having somebody that you can soundboard what's really happening, who you can trust and who's not going to disclose your information. You can hire that in a team like doctors and therapists and coaches, but you can also keep that in your close relationships, because those close relationships safeguard you. And universally, it is part of the abuser's playbook to isolate you from those people. And they do it through all kinds of machinations and manipulations of truth, or, defaming your family, or ultimatums, and making you make choices that are unreasonable. I would say the second thing is to make sure that you can have open conversations about that move. And both people should be able to see independent lives of value in that move. And if you can't have open conversations with your significant other or your partner that you're traveling with or going to make an international move with in the first place, if they aren't as curious and interested in you having rights and access, and by rights, I mean, again, what are the political rights in that country for a man or a woman? What are the rights available to somebody? The right to stay and live and work and earn and open bank accounts? What are your rights to health care and independent of your marriage? Both people should be able to be okay. You should be looking at whether or not you want to, like in Switzerland, for example, there are certain cantons. It is cantonal, and many people can vote, even though they are not passport holders for many different kinds of elections. And so I do think it's important to ask yourself that question: do I want a second passport, or do I want to be a passport holder of this country? And if not, what are my rights where I reside as a resident? How can I assert for my will or my wish. I think in that open conversation, whether or not you have any transparency in your relationship, really, like, do you have access to the bank accounts and the financial information? Because when you start to notice, or if, God forbid, you start to notice that you are in an abusive structure, then it's time to get really practical and tactical.
Right. Or before. And that's why I think your Women Rock Switzerland group is so important, because it's a women's group where women can openly, it's private, it's set for the people that are members, but women can openly kind of talk to each other, find out what the other ones are doing, find support from each other, as well as your consulting firm. I just want to give a quick heads up to that, because it is a consulting firm. I believe you'll explain this yourself about, for helping with coaching and making people into the professional ideal that they'd like to be. But also, I could imagine that it would help someone who's trying to get all their finances in order, who's trying to get their career on the right path, so that at that stage, they will have something to fall back on. So, I mean, for anyone who's interested, of course, this will be up on lifehacks.com. It will be on our blog section. Michelle will probably contribute lots of information about wellness, health, coaching, as well as consultation. For anyone who's interested, that's www.salt.consulting, and Women Rock Switzerland are great resources for you to go onto, and many great events coming up. Michelle, could you want to tell us a little bit about that? What are some of the things?
Sure. Well, we're most excited about the launch of the Integrity Works 12-week group coaching program, which is available to anyone in the world, because we meet digitally twice weekly on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that's 7 to 8 p.m. Central European time. And what you are involved with Integrity Works is we've just found that for the democratization of coaching, that we needed to adjust the way in which we work to make sure that more people get access to best-in-class coaching. Because in this context, also, when you're going through personal crisis, whether that is bad diagnosis, a high conflict divorce, an international move, the death of a loved one, all kinds of, the global pandemic and war. When we are facing crisis, we need a certain kind of team around us. And absolutely, it's the subject of my TEDx talk, Teaming Through Personal Crisis, or Rowing Through Personal Crisis with Your Team, because I used a rowing analogy. And I think it's really great. I hope everybody watches it just to get some resourcing right now for free, grâce à TED. But we're excited about that September 5th launch. And currently there's an early bird special. So I'm excited about that, because you'll get a group, you'll get a community, and you'll get best-in-class coaching tools that we believe everybody should have access to for self-coaching purposes. But can I go back just to the point of helping people get practical and tactical when going through divorce? Because I think it's so important that people get value on this call right now. And I know you do too. The top life hack that people need to prevent or minimize the pain of abuse is that willingness to look at your actual rights, and then to keep really extraordinary records. And if you do find that you're in an abusive circumstance, then records and the way you organize and the way you team is the most important strategic advantage that you can have, because you'll likely get blocked out of money. You likely get blocked out of connections. You'll have to work back at those and come back to those. And so keeping your digital records, making sure that you establish new accounts and new passwords, and share any. You can photograph all, your documentation, and you can share that content with a trusted other outside of your physical home and space. Don't keep it just on a jump drive. Get it out, get it away. Make sure that you have records of what's happening, what's going on. Even your own private journal can really help you when you're going through a court case to establish patterns of behavior that can help you. Okay. So learning the signs of abuse, and then committing to value yourself to disengage and get away. Disengaging and getting away is really, really, really appropriate, because it's very hard to find the stamina, the energy, the confidence, and the team to support you going through that crisis, no matter the crisis, when you're in it. And one of the final top tips I'll say is we've got to be able to name the crisis we're actually in. If you have a terrible diagnosis and you name it, I've got stage X cancer, then you go and get a team for that. And when you have a high conflict divorce, you go and get a team for that. And if we don't name it, and so many people who experience trauma, they don't name their trauma, they don't name their crisis. So how on earth can you build an appropriate and effective team or strategies to get out of that? And in the process, I think it's important to realize that injustice may happen despite your organization, despite your preparedness, despite the brilliance of your team. It may still happen for any number of myriad systemic reasons, because the judicial system is flawed and archaic in many countries around the world. I've gotten to explore 3 of them through this divorce. And the stigma, shame, anger, and blame is disproportionate to the patriarchal ills and the isms and othering that countries and nation states are still very pervasively doing.
Right. And speaking of which, you're publishing a book that has a number of wonderful women in it who have been through all sorts of different life changes and struggles. Is that something we want to talk about later on?
Well, yeah, but let's just quickly say, so Women Rock Switzerland is a community for women's economic empowerment, but it's also really designed to be forever free, but it's for women who are Swiss-based and 20 years of age or older, and who are ready to operate in English. So it's an English-speaking community, but we have women from over 85 nationalities around the world, and we do anonymous posting and offer that as a service, meaning people will write me or my business partner with their questions or queries designed for the group, and we, of course, maintain and keep anonymity, and even will anonymously respond that person's thanks when needed. And so that advocacy work has never been part of my mission, but as a business, and so to tie back in quickly to SALT Consulting and Communications and then to the book, we just never wanted to have to wait to be millionaires or blessed billionaires before we did good in the world. And so having a social business with this benevolent impact, and we had read some research, and I just said to Denise, I said, why don't we just test and prove that right? We had read research that despite the mentorship, reverse mentorship, returnship programs that companies are throwing money behind, what works best for women is informal networks, the ability to reach in informally, build relationships authentically, and be a real human being in digital spaces. And create that content so that people are motivated and inspired to connect with you because of shared interest, geographic location, an ability to help serve the need.
And that's the integrity system that we're going on to, which is the integritysystem.com, which is part of that intricate workings of Women Rock Switzerland and SALT Consulting, all working together to help people motivate themselves, structure themselves, and promote themselves in a good place.
Sure. Yes. Integrity Works is an online community with a closed group. And so the skills that we've gleaned and honed over really many groups beyond also Women Rock Switzerland, we run about 9, but the community management that we bring and that we use within organizations who are reestablishing engagement strategies for their employees, or when they're running events or they need expert talks, that community management, how you invite, excite, include, and engage others is a skill that we have and that we love to help leaders develop in themselves. And so Integrity Works is based on the 10 questions of the integrity system, which is like the textbook. Integrity Works is like the class and the community. So yes, that's how we come together in order to propagate coaching and self-coaching techniques so that people can get themselves pretty far ahead. Because in general, I've been coached since I was 5 years old in sports and then later on in business and entrepreneurship. And I just believe in coaching services and having outside eyes on anything that you care about, including projects, businesses, people, relationships, and life. How you're going to master and manage feeling that achievement that you deserve and that fulfillment that you want, that good vibe.
Well, that's so perfect, Michelle. And those are perfect life hacks. And we look forward to having you more often on lifehacks.com. That's with a K and an X. We will be posting all of your information on LifeHacks. And thank you so much for your solid wonderful advice, helping people move forward with their lives, women move forward with their businesses and their future. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mary. I really appreciate the chance and to speak with your audience. Thank you.
DJ saved my life. Last night a DJ saved my life. Yeah.
LifeHakX. LifeHakX.com. That's with a K and an X on RadioX.